The American poet Theodor Roethke has always fascinated me. I agree with Seamus Heaney, who said he is outside movements and generations and his work is a true growth. I don't think this is entirely true. I think he was in a sense a precursor of the confessional poets like Robert Lowell and Sylvia Plath in the 50s and 60s. And like both Lowell and Plath, he suffered from quite serious bouts of mental illness and spent time in psychiatric institutions in the 30s. His father and an uncle ran a plant nursery, and it was in this strange, perhaps controlled wilderness that Roethke grew up in, and which is the source of a huge amount of his imagery. His work is not immense. His collected poems are very short, but there are a huge number which are important. The first poem that I came across was the opening poem of his first collection. It is simply called Open House, which I think is a good reflection of the way he felt and the way he saw and the way he wrote. My secrets cry aloud. I have no need for tongue. My heart keeps open house. My doors are widely swung. An epic of the eyes, my love with no disguise. My truths are all foreknown, this anguish self-revealed. I'm naked to the bone, with nakedness my shield. Myself is what I wear, I keep the spirit spare. The anger will endure, the deed will speak the truth. In language strict and pure, I stop the lying mouth. Rage warps my clearest cry to witless agony. It was his agony which pervaded his life. He did eventually marry a former student who became Beatrice Roethke, but his life certainly was not a happy life. He was a visiting professor of poetry at various universities in between bouts of mental illness, and he certainly could never be called a happy man or a happy poet. He was also very competitive, and I think he felt that his work was not given the recognition that it was due. This sense of being brought up in a plant nursery comes across very well in this poem, Slow Season. Now light is less. Noon skies are wide and deep. The ravages of wind and rain are healed. The haze of harvests drifts along the field until clear eyes put on the look of sleep. The garden spider weaves a silken pair to keep inclement weather from its young. Straight from the oak the gossamer is hung. At dusk our slow breath thickens on the ear. Lost hues of birds or trees take as their own. Long since bronze wheat was gathered into sheaves. The walker trudges ankle deep in leaves. The feather of the milkweed flutters down. The shoots of spring have mellowed with the year. Buds long unsealed obscure the narrow lane. The blood slows trance-like in the altered vein. Our vernal wisdom moves through ripe to sear. Perhaps there is an influence there in the Romantic poets, in Wordsworth, but it's not all that clear to see. This poem, Mid-Country Blow, gives a hugely marvellous sense of a very powerful wind. All night and all day, the wind roared in the trees, until I could think there were waves rolling high as my bedroom floor. When I stood at the window, an elm bough swept to my knees. The blue spruce lashed like a surf at the door. The second dawn I would not have believed. The oak stood with each leaf stiff as a bell. When I look at the altered scene, my eye was undeceived, but my ear still kept the sound of the sea, like a shell. His work is wonderfully concentrated. That poem is only 8 lines long, and sometimes American poets have a habit of writing, like Whitman, eternally long poems, but on the whole, Roethke's poems were short and very much to the point and very concentrated, and there were no wasted words. And this is another poem of his childhood. There's a whole series written together. This is called Root Cellar. Nothing would sleep in that cellar, dank as a ditch. Bulbs broke out of boxes, hunting for chinks in the dark. Shoots dangled and drooped, lolling obscenely from mildewed crates. Hung down long yellow evil necks like tropical snakes. And what a congress of stinks! Roots ripe as old bait, pulpy stems, rank, silo-rich, leaf mould, manure, lime, piled against slippery planks. Nothing would give up life. Even the dirt kept breathing a small breath. Forcing house. Vines tougher than wrists and rubbery shoots, scums, mildews, smuts along stems, great canners or delicate cyclamen tips, all pulse with the knocking pipes that drip and sweat, sweat and drip, swelling the roots with steam and stench, shooting up lime and dung and ground bones, 50 summers in motion at once, as the live heat billows from pipes and pots. Weed puller. Under the concrete benches, hacking at black hairy roots, those lewd monkey tails hanging from drain holes, digging into the soft rubble underneath, webs and weeds, grubs and snails and sharp sticks, or yanking tough fern shapes, coiled green and thick like dripping smilax, tugging all day at perverse life. The indignity of it, with everything blooming above me, lilacs, pale pink cyclamen, roses, whole fields lovely and inviolate, me down in that fetor of weeds, crawling on all fours, alive, in a slippery grave. Orchids. They lean over the path, adder-mouthed, swaying close to the face, coming out, soft and deceptive, limp and damp, delicate as a young bird's tongue. Their fluttery fledgling lips move slowly, drawing in the warm air. And at night, the faint moon, falling through whitewashed glass, the heat going down, so their musky smell comes even stronger, drifting down from their mossy cradles, so many devouring infants, soft luminescent fingers, lips neither dead nor alive, loose ghostly mouths, breathing. You sense in his appreciation of nature not just the benignness that Wordsworth saw, but a hidden menace, nature red in tooth and claw. This is a rather more exuberant poem, again extremely short, only 7 lines long, one of his most anthologised poems, Child on Top of a Greenhouse. The wind billowing out the seat of my breeches, my feet crackling splinters of glass and dried putty, the half-grown chrysanthemums staring up like accusers, up through the streaked glass, flashing with sunlight, a few white clouds all rushing eastward, a line of elms plunging and tossing in courses, and everyone pointing up and shouting. An even shorter poem, Carnations. Pale blossoms, each balanced on a single jointed stem. The leaves curled back in elaborate Corinthian scrolls, and the air cool as if drifting down from wet hemlocks, or rising out of ferns not far from water, a crisp hyacinthine coolness, like that clear autumnal weather of eternity, the windless perpetual morning above a September cloud. His poems did not entirely resort to the imagery of immediate nature. He did begin later on to write more personal poems, particularly this one, Frau Baumann, Frau Schmidt and Frau Schwarze. Although his parents were German and German was spoken at home, strangely Roethke never managed to master German. In fact, he boasted about the fact he knew about 6 words. Gone the 3 ancient ladies, who creaked on the greenhouse ladders, reaching up white stings to wind the sweet pea tendrils, the smilax nasturtiums, the climbing roses, to straighten carnations, red chrysanthemums, the stiff gems, jointed like corn. They tied and tucked, those nurses of nobody else. Quicker than birds, they dipped up and sifted the dirt, they sprinkled and shook. They stood astride pipes, their skirts billowing out wide into tents, their hands twinkling with wet. Like witches they flew among rows, keeping creation at ease. With a tendril for needle, they sewed up the air with a stem. They teased out the seed that the cold kept asleep, all the coils, loops and whorls. They trellised the sun, they plotted for more than themselves. I remember how they picked me up, a spindly kid, pinching and poking my thin ribs, till I lay in their laps laughing, weak as a whifflet. Now, when I'm alone and cold in my bed, they still hover over me, those ancient leathery crones, with their bandanas stiffened with sweat, and their thorn-bitten wrists, and their snuff-laden breath blowing lightly over me in my first sleep. In Elegy for Jane, we get perhaps his most personally, strongly felt emotional poem about another person. Jane was a student who died suddenly, thrown by a horse. Elegy for Jane. I remember the neck curls, limp and damp as tendrils, and her quick look, a sidelong pickerel smile, and how, once startled into talk, the light syllables leapt for her, and she balanced in the delight of her thought, a wren, happy, tail into the wind, her song trembling the twigs and small branches. The shade sang with her, the leaves their whispers turned to kissing, and the mould sang in the bleached valleys under the rose. Oh, when she was sad, she cast herself down into such a pure depth, even a father could not find her, scraping her cheek against straw, stirring the clearest water. My sparrow, you are not here, waiting like a fern, making a spiny shadow. The sides of wet stones cannot console me, nor the moss wound with the last light. If only I could nudge you from this sleep, my maimed darling, my skittery pigeon. Over this damp grave I speak the words of my love, I, with no rights in this matter, neither father nor lover. I think in some ways that's certainly my favourite poem, possibly Roethke's best poem. A poem that is universally popular is this one, I Knew a Woman. I knew a woman, lovely in her bones. When small birds sighed, she would sigh back at them. Ah, when she moved more ways than one. The shapes a bright container can contain. Of her choice virtues only gods should speak, or English poets who grew up on Greek. I'd have them sing in chorus, cheek to cheek. How well she taught her wishes. She stroked my chin. She taught me turn and counter-turn and stand. She taught me touch, that undulant white skin. I nibbled meekly from her proffered hand. She was a sickle, poor I the rake, coming behind her for her pretty sake. But what prodigious mowing did we make? Let seed be grass, and grass turn into hay. I'm martyr to a motion not my own. What's freedom for? To know eternity, I swear she cast a shadow, white as stone. But who could count eternity in days? Those old bones lived to learn her wanton ways. I measure time by how a body sways.